You were never taught how to carry your mind. They handed you books, told you to think critically, but never warned you that seeing deeper would cost you company. You walk into a room and notice the tension before anyone speaks. You catch the subtext behind every compliment. You recognize the patterns people pretend they don't repeat. And after a while, it becomes exhausting. Not because you don't love people, but because your mind won't let you unsee. They talk about small things. You think about the collapse of meaning. They laugh at gossip. You're quietly wondering why no one questions anything. And so you laugh along but feel miles away. Because no one prepared you for the silent exile that comes with being too aware. Intellect isolates. The deeper the mind, the lonelier the path. This is what Schopenhauer understood, that the more you develop your intellect, the more you shed illusions that bind others together. You don't see community, and you see collective delusion. You don't see fun. You see distraction and desperation. And when you try to explain yourself, they say you're negative, cold, arrogant. But you're not trying to be superior. You're just tired of pretending you don't notice the emptiness behind the noise. So you pull back. You speak less. You retreat to books, to solitude, to silence. And while others gather in packs, you begin walking alone. Not because you chose loneliness, but because you refuse to choose self-betrayal. You used to crave belonging. Now you crave peace. You used to try to fit in. Now you wonder why you ever needed to. And yet, even in your clarity, there's a quiet ache that lingers. A question that haunts you late at night. Will anyone ever see me fully without me having to dim down? If you've ever felt like your intelligence is a curse, if you've ever had to shrink to be included, if you've ever walked away from a conversation, feeling more alone than before you entered, this video is for you. This is not about ego. It's about clarity and the cost it demands. It's about understanding that being awake in a sleeping world is not a gift that comes with applause. It comes with silence. And if that hurts, you're not broken. You're just tuned in to a level most people will never reach. The more you understand, the more you'll stand alone. Mirror question. When did seeing the truth make you feel most alone? You were taught that intelligence would connect you, that being smart meant respect, that deep thought meant recognition, that understanding would be welcomed. But what they didn't tell you is that people don't want truth. They want comfort. They want reassurance, not revelation. They want certainty, not complexity. So the moment your questions got too deep, too strange, too piercing, they smiled politely and slowly began to push you out. The truth will set you free, but first, it will alienate you. Society doesn't reward the thinker. It rewards the agreeable. From school to workplace, you're told, think critically. But what they really mean is, think within the lines we've drawn for you. Step outside. And suddenly, you're difficult, too intense, too analytical, too much. So you start hiding your thoughts. You water down your words. You nod when you want to question. You laugh when you want to scream. Why? Because you were programmed to believe that connection is more valuable than authenticity. That blending in is safer than standing apart. But here's the paradox. The smarter you become, the lonelier you feel. Not because you're broken, but because the room you once fit into can no longer contain your questions. Schopenhauer called this the fate of the deep spirit. He said the average person cannot tolerate the thinker because the thinker disrupts narratives, disrupts comfort, disrupts the illusion of certainty that keeps society calm. So instead of being celebrated, you are quietly exiled. They won't call you a threat. They'll call you overthinker, too serious, too sensitive, because it's easier to label you than to listen to what you really see. The lie you were sold was simple. If you just stay true to yourself, the world will welcome you. But the truth is brutal. The world doesn't want you to be whole. It wants you to be harmless. So what do? You stop asking for permission. You stop dumbing yourself down for the comfort of others. You stop apologizing for the depth you carry, and you start building a life not around approval, but around clarity. Even if that clarity costs you company, because in the end, the loneliest road is still better than the crowded path that leads you nowhere. Mirror question. What belief made you think that being smart would make you loved? There's an emotional economy in every social interaction. Some give, some take, some balance, some bleed. And the deeper your awareness, the more likely you are to be the one bleeding quietly. You notice what others don't. You process what others skip. You feel the weight of words left unsaid, the tension in silence, the emptiness behind forced smiles. And yet you say nothing, not because you don't care, but because you've learned. Awareness is not rewarded, it's taxed. The moment you try to speak your mind, to express what you really see, you disrupt the emotional flow. People recoil. They label you as negative, overthinker, cynic, too much. So you retreat. You learn to filter, to smile at things that don't amuse you, to nod at beliefs you don't hold, to carry your perceptions like a burden no one asked you to have. Why? Because in this emotional economy, truth is expensive and most can't afford it. Schopenhauer said, "The more unintelligent a man is, the less mysterious existence seems to him." Ignorance isn't just bliss. It's currency. It buys belonging. It buys ease. It buys relationships where no one ever looks too deep. But if you can't help but see, you can't help but pay. You'll pay in social friction. You'll pay in misunderstandings. You'll pay in quiet frustration. As people tell you to lighten up, when your whole being is made of depth, you don't want surface. You want substance. But substance is rare, and rare things come at a cost. So the question is not, why do I feel so alone? The real question is, what am I no longer willing to pretend in order to be accepted? Because the more you awaken, the less willing you are to trade your peace for momentary comfort. The less willing you are to explain yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. And the more willing you are to choose solitude over self-betrayal. In the end, emotional awareness doesn't make you fragile. It makes you precise. And precision is rarely embraced by a world that runs on noise. Mirror question. Where in your life are you paying a price for seeing too clearly? It doesn't happen all at once. It's not dramatic. It's quiet, like a slow erosion. One day, you realize that the people around you no longer hear what you're really saying. You share a thought, and they blink. You express a fear, and they laugh. You try to show them your world, and they look away. So you begin to collapse inward, not out of bitterness, not out of pride, but because you realize something gutting. They're not rejecting you. They're rejecting the parts of you they can't understand. And the more you grow, the more of you becomes invisible. Schopenhauer warned us, a high degree of intellect tends to make a man unsocial. 4. Not by choice, but by consequence. Your mind begins to ask questions that their worldviews can't survive. Your clarity cuts through facades they still need to believe in. You think you're connecting, but you're exposing. And exposure breeds discomfort. Discomfort leads to distance. And distance turns to exile. You become that person. Too intense, too deep, too reflective. And slowly, you're left on the outside, watching people bond over illusions you can no longer participate in. This is the collapse, not of your worth, but of your place. You don't belong where masks are required, where shallow talk is survival, where truth is a threat. So you pull away. You stop attending. You stop calling. You stop trying to make it fit, because trying hurts more than being alone. And then the final realization sets in. You were never misunderstood. You were just too honest for people who survive on pretending. That's not arrogance. It's grief. Because you wanted to be known, not feared. You wanted to be seen, not studied. But the more clearly you saw others, the less clearly they could handle you. And so the exile became permanent. But what if this collapse wasn't your end? What if it was the beginning of a life built not on belonging, but on being? Mirror question. Who stopped understanding you the moment you stopped hiding? At first, the silence is unbearable. The absence of validation, the lack of belonging, the echo of your own thoughts, unshared. You think something is wrong with you, that you are too much, too complex, too heavy. But then, something shifts. In the stillness of your exile, a new voice rises. Not loud, but steady. It says, you were never supposed to fit. You were supposed to see. And this is where the Stoic shift begins. You stop asking, why don't they understand me? And start asking, what am I building inside myself? You let go of the need to be seen, and begin the work of seeing yourself. No applause, no spotlight, no tribe, just you, and the weight of your own truth. The Stoics taught that the only true empire is the one within. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, nowhere you can go is more peaceful, more free of interruptions than your own soul. So you go there. You stop chasing belonging in noisy rooms. You stop begging to be heard by people who only listen to what flatters them. You begin walking alone, not as punishment, but as purification. You learn to sit with your discomfort until it sharpens into clarity. You learn to bear your solitude until it transforms into sovereignty. This isn't about isolation, it's about individuation. Carl Jung called it the process of becoming whole, a journey that cannot be shared. He said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But that privilege demands price. The price is letting go, of needing to be understood, of trying to explain your depths to those content with surfaces. So instead, you go inward. You audit your mind. You confront your shadows. You begin building a life where your worth isn't decided by response, but by resonance. You start creating not for applause, but for truth. You speak not to convince, but to express. You move not to be liked, but to remain aligned. And slowly, you realize something liberating. You don't need the world's approval to justify your vision. You just need to see clearly, to act cleanly, to think deeply, to be. This is the Stoic man. He does not beg. He does not perform. He does not chase. He stands. And when the world ignores him, he nods, because he knows the path of truth is rarely crowded. And so, from the ashes of rejection, a new figure rises, not wounded, but wise. Mirror question. What have you built inside yourself since the world stopped seeing you? People mistake emotional detachment for coldness. They think you've shut down, that you've given up, that you've lost the capacity to care. But they're wrong. You didn't shut down. You simply stopped leaking. You realized you can't pour into a world that keeps poking holes in you. Emotional detachment isn't rejection. It's protection. You felt too much, too long. You've explained yourself into exhaustion. You've shown up fully, vulnerably, only to be told you're too intense. So you stop offering your essence to those who only skim your surface. And in that space, a quiet power grows. You detach not because you're bitter, but because you finally understand that depth is sacred, and not everyone is worthy of access. You begin to treat your inner world like a temple, not a marketplace. You become slow to speak, measured in presence, intentional with emotion, and most importantly, you no longer seek rescue, because you've become the sanctuary you used to search for in others. Schopenhauer knew this kind of silence. He lived alone, thought alone, wrote alone, not because he hated people, but because he couldn't pretend. He once said, companionship is like a shadow. The more you chase it, the more it eludes you. So he stopped chasing, and in that choice, he became untouchable, not unreachable, not heartless, just unhooked. This is what emotional detachment really means. You can love without losing yourself. You can care without collapsing. You can connect without clinging. You can observe the chaos and not absorb it. You can walk away from noise and still keep your center. You no longer seek to be everything to everyone. You just seek to be whole to you. Solitude becomes less of a sentence and more of a sanctuary. It is in this detachment that your clarity sharpens, your power settles, and your presence begins to speak louder than any performance ever could. Mirror question. Where in life have you confused being emotionally available with being emotionally exposed? You thought the truth would free you, but you didn't realize truth also isolates. Because clarity doesn't just illuminate, it threatens, it confronts, it breaks illusions others depend on to survive. And when you begin to see too clearly, they begin to pull away quietly. You walk into a room and you feel it, that subtle tension. The smiles shrink, the conversations shift. People say, you think too much. But what they mean is, you see what we're not ready to face. You became a mirror, and mirrors make people uncomfortable because they're not ready to see their apathy, their borrowed beliefs, their emotional dependence, their shallow coping. You didn't attack them, you just stopped playing along. And that, in itself, was violence to their fragile consensus. This is the quiet punishment for being awake in a sleeping world. You don't get burned at the stake. You get disinvited. You get unfollowed. You get ghosted. You're labeled too deep, too serious, or too much. Not because you are, but because they've built their lives in shallow water. And when you show up like the ocean, they run. Schopenhauer saw this clearly. He wrote, "The more unintelligent a man is, the less mysterious existence seems to him." And, in other words, depth reveals mystery, and mystery demands humility, but ego prefers certainty. So when you speak from depth, they hear confusion. When you speak with nuance, they hear contradiction. When you speak the unspeakable, they accuse you of arrogance, because your insight reminds them of what they've refused to explore. And yet, there's no other way to live. You can't unsee. You can't unknow. You can't go back. So you embrace the consequence. Yes, you will be misunderstood. Yes, you will lose people. Yes, you will be alone. But in that solitude, you gain something they never will. Integrity. You no longer trade truth for comfort. You no longer dilute your insight to be included. You no longer abandon your depth just to be digestible. You stay true, even when it costs you company, applause, or intimacy. And ironically, that truth becomes your new magnet. You begin to attract those who crave clarity, who are done pretending, who would rather sit in silence with you than scream in shallow joy with others. Your presence becomes rarer, your words become heavier, and your value no longer needs to be explained. Mirror question. What truth have you silenced just to stay connected? You're not broken. You're not too much. You're just rare. And rare things are always misunderstood at first. You've spent your life trying to fold yourself into a world that celebrates surface, while your soul was built for the depths. You kept asking, why can't I connect like everyone else? But now you see, you were never meant to connect with everyone. You were meant to connect with what's true. Schopenhauer lived his life alone, but not bitter. He saw solitude, not as exile, but as evolution. He wrote, "A man can be himself only so long as he is alone." End quote. And now, you understand that. You've walked through the rejection. You've sat with the silence. You've stared into the mirror without flinching. And what you found wasn't weakness. It was essence. They call it loneliness. You call it liberation. Because in your solitude, you found standards. You found peace that doesn't rely on performance. You found clarity that doesn't need confirmation. You no longer beg to be seen. You choose to be clear. You no longer prove. You embody. You no longer chase. You stand. And the final realization? You're not alone because something's wrong with you. You're alone because you stopped living wrong. You refused to wear masks. You stopped echoing empty conversations. You stopped shrinking yourself just to be invited. You chose depth. And yes, it cost you company, but it gave you yourself. This is not the end. It's the beginning of a life built on truth, not approval, on sovereignty, not survival, on presence, not performance. You are not broken. You're just done pretending. Mirror question. What part of yourself are you reclaiming now that you no longer need to be understood?